we've actually gone through some webinars that we've recorded and then we forgot to download it, or we forgot to initially record it. So reminders are helpful for everybody as we're learning new routines with the work that we're doing. Also, if you've attended the webinars last month, there was a lot of requests that the webinars be in PowerPoint format, and we made some assumptions that they were, but they're uploaded in PDF, and we apologize if we said, no, they're PowerPoints. So all documents are uploaded in PDF form, and if you are interested in the PowerPoint, we're happy to send that to you. You're just gonna have to email us, and you'll see our email addresses at the end of this PowerPoint.
And they're up there as PDFs for a very good reason, because in the PDF format, there are lots more opportunities and ways for people that might be hard of hearing, multiple different handicapping conditions, so that they can also make use of the webinars. So, all right, so our objectives for today are really to provide and remind ourselves of those PBIS principles for how we respond to minor misbehaviors, and specifically talking about how do we take what we know to the virtual classroom, and how do we make use of what we've already done and bring that to the virtual classroom. Build off of what we have done already with our students. And then we're going to also talk about examining some keys to success for how we're going to respond to those challenges in our virtual classroom. Our expectations today are that we're going to be respectful, and we're going to do that by using the chat box. And that's how we're going to ask questions and answer any prompts that we come up with today, so that we can learn from each other. Christy's manning the chat box because I have not built the skill set to do the PowerPoint and the chat box. You don't want me to go.
I'm still learning too.
So she's manning those for us.
And I'll be putting links up along the way.
Right. And then we want to make sure that we're being safe. So we're going to continue our safe at home protocol and use our physical distancing, which in California looks like is going to continue for quite a while. And we're going to be working on how do we work in both places, the virtual classroom and the in-person classroom. We want to make sure that we're responsible so that we can increase our social emotional connections more than ever. When you get invited to a breakout room, be sure to join, and then you will unmute yourself and be able to introduce yourselves and have a conversation.
All right, so let's get started. So imagine this scenario. One day you're spending time with your students in this physical, positive, nurturing, safe educational environment, and the next day, boom, you're in this virtual, remote, new way of learning classroom. So we want you to use the chat box to respond to this prompt. What do you miss the most from your classroom and life at school? So go ahead and be thinking about that. It's a reflective kind of question. And while you're adding to the chat box, there are some responses that teachers across the country have been saying, and you guys can see what some of those are, or if you go back a slide.
Oh, okay. I thought that was on this slide.
It seems that our teachers are really missing that human connection. If you think about that, the hugs, the giggles, the energy, the joy, interaction, people are saying, the space and time to do things uninterrupted, good one. Face-to-face interactions, oh, human connection, okay, again, being able to quickly respond to students' moods and needs, plus being able to joke with them. Yeah, it's kind of hard to joke during that virtual, like, back and forth, isn't it? Yeah, hugs and laughter. Yeah, so it's kind of just nice to reflect on what is it that we're really missing right now. And there was really an interesting webinar that I listened to, and Barb, you can go to the next slide. And it was a conversation with students, and that was done with the Midwest Equity Consortium, and they asked students what they missed. And there were just a couple of things from their responses, and these students were of all ages. And so we kind of gathered and synthesized the information. And so what we have learned from our kids is that during this remote learning time, We need to be empathetic and aware of the spectrum of emotions our students might be experiencing right now. Because our students are really craving this consistency and predictability. They need that instructive way to understand the routines and schedules that are going to be new to them with remote learning. And most importantly, our students miss us and they miss each other. They miss having this second family that we've created, the relationships that we've built. So make sure you reach out for reassurance, which I know we all have. And when you are instructing remotely, remember to provide opportunities for peer connection, for them to be able to express how they're feeling with each other, and then being able to take that in other settings, like back in their home.
So as always, we want to make sure that we are grounding the work that we do in the tiered fidelity inventory, because this is an evidence-based practice, which is wonderful for us now because we can fall back on that, knowing that these principles are going to get us the results that we're looking for. So in this particular webinar, we're really hooking into those discipline policies. And I like to be reminded of two quotes from Dr. Horner. One is, we really don't correct something if we haven't taught it. So we need to remember how important it is that as you define your behavioral expectations and the behaviors that you have online are in your remote learning, we also need to make sure that we're teaching what that looks like. So what does it look like when you are signing in or using the chat box or moving around in your home while you're on video? And until we've defined, taught, modeled, and practiced and reinforced and retaught those, it's really unethical for adults to punish. So we just can't go to that punish first or those consequences first. We need to make sure that we're doing these practices, these evidence-based practice. We want to be proactive and preventative, want to make sure we're staying positive, and we want it to be instructive and restorative. And we're going to talk about each of these today and how you'll do that online. We're also going to look at the tiered fidelity inventory that relates to the classroom practices. And these are those features that include school-wide expectations. We've talked about those in past webinars, the routines that we want to teach, how we do acknowledgments, how we do acknowledgments online and how important that is. We talked about that last week. And then we want to look at building an in-class continuum of consequences. So we're going to talk, that's what our topic is about today. In this continuum, we want to make sure that it's proactive and it's instructive and that it's restorative. It's important for us to remember that when we're responding to problem behavior, it's really making sure that we're staying instructive. And we're going to go through steps to be able to do that today. We want to teach those resiliency skills, and we do that in the way that we teach kids how to handle problems and how we're going to handle the problems that we might be having with our students. We want to be working on replacing those learned responses with the taught appropriate behaviors, so that helps kids with self-regulation. And one of the things we have to think about, a lot of our kids have some online behaviors. They've been doing gaming for a long time. And so we have to make sure that those gaming habits, or the way that they were with gaming, their previously learned responses online, aren't what they're doing in our classrooms with us. So right now, we'd like you to think about what are some of those misbehaviors that are happening in your remote learning. So use the chat box. Again, Christy's going to man it for us and be able to report out some of the things that we're hearing. You guys can all see it. She's reporting it out really for my benefit. What are some minor misbehaviors that are happening for you during your remote learning? Let's make a list of those. Just take a minute here.
I think that key word you said was minor misbehaviors.
Yeah.
Kids shouting on unrelated comments, chatting in chat room, kids getting distracted by TV or radio, unmuting themselves, kids getting up and walking away, using the chat box to talk with other students, students not turning in work, typing a rude comment.
Anybody had where kids are changing their virtual backgrounds all the time in the back?
Constantly playing like backgrounds. That's right there, Barb.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, 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 and yes.
Yeah. So,
not not showing up at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
And
working with
I'm
adults.
going to use not showing up at all as really a major behavior. And there are lots of reasons why, but in this webinar, we're not going to talk about things that we can do for those that aren't showing up. Email at 1 or 2 in the morning. Emails at 1 or 2 in the morning. Making silly faces on the camera, freezing and talking. Okay, so we get that idea. Great.
I think some of those 1 or 2 a.m. in the mornings might be high school. So that's one of the problems we're having with the middle and the high school kids is they're doing this when they want to and not necessarily, you know, when it's really happening. Okay, so then we've gone through a few of those minor misbehaviors, and we want to make sure that we are looking at those first with an instructional focus. So again, if everybody could make sure that they're muted during this time, because there's so many of us online, it would be helpful. So the minor misbehaviors are addressed with an instructional focus, really important. And our mantra is going to be throughout this time, how am I as a teacher going to prevent this behavior from happening again? So that's that whole prevention focus. It happens, you're going to respond to it with what we're coming up with today, what we're going to talk about, but then how are we going to also plan ahead so that we're preventing that from happening again?
I also want to call attention to the chat box. I've just posted a document that came out yesterday. It came out from the PBIS apps team. And Celeste, I don't know if you were on the phone, but I'm going to shout out how wonderful and responsive your team is. And there's an article called A 4-Step Plan for Handling Problem Behaviors Remotely. It's the 4th step that I want to call attention to. And that's, when do we document behaviors? What we need to consider are the systems of how we document behaviors that are happening remotely. And so please take a look at that document. It's an amazing document, and it gives us some ideas of what we need to go back to, of how we've already set up systems for documentation and how we can do that remotely. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this chat box so I can see Barb. So hang on. So would you go back, please, to the continuum? Awesome. Thanks, Barb. So let's talk about really what we would want in any kind of response practice. We're really talking about an educational approach to support student learning and how they can demonstrate appropriate skills. And we're going to tell you that teachers already have, we already have a toolkit that really has response practices, not one practice, but a continuum of respectful strategies that address challenging behaviors. In this toolkit, we talk about a continuum, but it's a continuum of intensity. And it's pretty important to know that one strategy, right, is not effective for all kids or all behaviors. And so that's why we need this movement from least to most intense. So we want to have something that's very practical, and we can be able to do it, and not something so out there that's not evidence-based but sounds really great. We want to make sure that what's in our toolkit has the lens of what we know of trauma-informed educators, and that would be that our response practices should be able to support students, to help them regulate, to connect with adults, and to allow problem solving. We want to make sure that we focus on consistency and patience when we are responding, and that's our behavior. And any kind of response practice should be something that we communicate support, caring, and relationship building with our students. So here's what it's not. It's not a list of punishments. And it's definitely not a public shaming response cost system. Here are some non-examples of what it's not. It's not glue sticks. And it's not these contorted facial expressions when you give direct eye contact as a response strategy that will require you to have facials every week either. So there's some little examples, but we're going to show you on the next slide. And we also have a document that's on the handout that you can download that has the definitions and descriptions of an example of a continuum. Remember, from least to most intense.
And
And
these are
so
on page 2 of the handout if you've got the handout out.
yeah, so that would be there as well. And then a link, this came from the Midwest PBIS network. And we're just going to briefly go through these, but we want to make sure that you know that this isn't what your toolkit should look like. You shouldn't have all of these things in your toolkit. We can't. We're just giving you an example of what would be in your toolkit. What does your department or your grade level group agree on that would be in your classroom toolkit? Maybe 2 or 3 or 4 ways of responding to problem behavior from least to most intense. So again, that's part of system development to be able to do that. But here's an example of these practices. From planned ignoring, which just means those attention-seeking kids, you just ignore them, continue your instruction, to being able to signal or give that nonverbal cue, being able to whatever that might be, direct them maybe back to your teaching matrix as just a signal. That physical proximity is just as powerful as you're just close and you're communicating, I notice you, I care about you, and I'm concerned. Giving direct eye contact, giving, again, that teacher look, but it's not the one that contort your face so much that you have to have facials. But I know that we all have that little eye look, right? Or I kind of add my smile too with the eye. But that just gave me wrinkles. So maybe I do need facials because of that. No. Being able to praise appropriate behavior in others. So that's kind of really telling the whole class, this is what we should be doing. This is what our expectations are for this particular routine, although you're really kind of directing it to that one student. And redirecting is going back. What was it that we all agreed on for this routine, for this expectation? What does that look like? And what will we all acknowledge each other when we see it happening? Praise approximation is being able to, maybe for that one student or groups of students, look at what they're doing right. What's the appropriate behavior, and let them know, and ignore the misbehavior.
And I think a lot of these evidence-based practices, we've talked about this before when we did the classroom, are in that responding to problem behavior document that's at the PBIS.org website. So it'll go into more definition. For example, when you're talking about the planned ignoring, you want to make sure that you're also adding into that your praise appropriate behaviors with others, you know, so that the planned ignoring will be more successful. So a lot of these happen simultaneously or together to be more powerful. The other thing I'm thinking that we have to start thinking about as kids come back to school and we begin to have where we're doing virtual as well as in classroom is that physical proximity. What are we going to do differently with that? And the direct eye contact is going to be important because we can't see our faces if we're, our mouths if we're all wearing a mask. So things that we have to think about as we begin to prepare for kids coming back at least part-time. As you go up this continuum, yes.
And that's a really good cue as well, to be all thinking about, these are the response practices, an example of a continuum of response practices that we know is evidence-based for the physical classroom. So please, let's take that lens of what we're doing right now in that remote virtual setting, and how could this work? Maybe it can, maybe it can't. Mm-hmm. So please be like taking that to the relevancy of our work right now.
Right. And know that our national centers are working crazily in order to see which one of these work and how they work better in our virtual classroom. So make sure you're checking with the PBIS.org website regularly, and as well as the PBIS apps website. Both of them are putting up great documents. So when we go up the continuum, the next thing we need to do is to reteach. So I think this is really good that this arrow changes and goes up, because that up arrow while you're going up there to the reteach is to remind you to take a minute, take a beat, step back, take a really deep breath, because by the time you get here and you're getting ready to reteach, you want to make sure you're coming at it with the right tone of voice. And one of the ways to do that is to step back. So we have to reteach what it is. That goes back to that quote that we heard earlier from Dr. Horner. We want to make sure that we're specific with our error corrections. We talked about that last time we got together, about how do you give a specific error correction. Oh, excuse me, that was just with the high school. So some of you weren't online at the high school when we really went over that strategy of how you give specific error corrections. We're going to talk about a little bit more with that, and how you regulate the and relate to the student. So that's more about how you're going to hold yourself as you go back to talk with students. You want to make sure that you're providing choice. And you don't have to go there now, but on the very last page of your handout, there's an example of the ways that you're able to give choice. Multiple examples of different types of choice. I think there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, about 7 of them. 7 categories of choice making. Good reminder. And then next would be that you have to stop and conference with the student. And then the next step up would be restorative circles, or a restorative conversation, really, with that student. And in those restorative conversations, you want to make sure that you're helping understand what the situation was, what happened. So you want to place that behavior in context. And why did you do that? So remind ourselves, we have to step back and take a look at what was the function of that behavior. What's the quickest way that we can think about why did you do that, to get something or to avoid something? The next question is, how did it make you feel? So we're tapping into now self-awareness, helping them think about what it was like for themselves. Then we want to move into, how do you think your behavior made other people feel? So now they're thinking about social awareness. So we're really tapping into what we know about social emotional learning. And then the next question is, what would you have done that would have been better for you to respond to that situation? What could you have done differently? So now we're helping the student define that replacement behavior that we're going to then help teach them how to do, but they can help come up with it themselves. And then what do you need to do in order to repair your current situation? So that's what we're going to be able to teach, that replacement behavior, and help them be able to make that happen. What can you do next time the situation happens? The next question that we would do. And that's really helping us help them minimize what it is that they were getting out of the old behavior, and how can they use the new behavior more. So this is all about self-empowering when you have these restorative conversations with students. And what help do you need from me? Or what help do you need from the whole group in order to make that help happen? So then you're establishing a common goal. And that final question is so important in either whether it's restorative circle or restorative conversation with an individual student, but to help them carry over and make sure that it happens. What can I do to help you? They own it, not us coming in to rescue and save them. So Christy's going to talk about our error corrections and what we need to be doing while I'm setting up the virtual classroom. So our question to you is going to be, what does it look like? But she's going to jump on now and give you these directions while I'm setting up the class, the breakout rooms.
Oh, sure. I'll give you directions for that. So one of the responses that Barbara went over was error correction. And that is the one that you can specifically find the definition, the example, the non-example, and then the evidence-based research and resources to support it. And that's in one of our documents, the supporting and responding to problem behavior document, but it's also in the handout, just this section. And I've been putting the link in the chat box for where you can get the handout, and then all the other links to these documents that we're telling you about. So what we want you to do is think about error correction. How can you be brief, contingent, and specific when you're correcting a student's misbehavior? And as Barb went through, there's a continuum, and it can be just prompting, and you could stop there if the behavior changed, but it could move to redirect, reteach, provide choice, or even go into the conferencing with the student. So the biggest piece that we all have to remember is that when we are correcting an error, we're going to have a greater chance of our student complying and demonstrating that appropriate behavior if we stay calm, if we go back and take a moment, a meta moment, to see, are we ready to address that behavior? Is my state in a place that if I ask the student or redirect, that student will comply? Because sometimes if my behavior is escalating through frustration, the student's behavior is more likely to escalate as well. So that's the biggest piece. And so how do we do that virtually? How would we stay consistent and let that student know now every time, or all your students know, that this is what error correction looks like. This is how I'm going to help you get back on track and be successful in the classroom. So consistency on our part is huge. And that really talks about transparency on our part to let the students know this is what it'll look like, and this is what I'll do, and this is what you'll do. And we have to be pretty immediate, right? We can't just like three remote sessions later address that behavior. And now we have opportunities to either have side chats or after remote, have a conference set up just to talk about it. But we always still want to be respectful, and we want to be specific. So with that,
yeah, if you'll turn and look on page 3, you'll have your guidelines, because you're going to lose these notes when I put you in the breakout room, about what does it look like in the virtual classroom when you're using prompting and redirecting and reteaching and providing choice and conferencing with the students. So I'm going to send you to the chat rooms now. You're going to go to 20 different rooms. You'll have about 12 to 13 people in a room. Be sure to unmute and have conversations with each other. You'll be able to chat for about 10 minutes. So I see many of you are starting to join your chat rooms. So as you join your chat rooms, everybody, go ahead and unmute yourselves and have your conversations with each other.
Okay.
I'm going to jump out of your chat room. Bye, everybody.
All right. See ya.
I think I'm jumping out. Yes, I am.
Well, thank you, Barbara.
I guess I'm not leaving. I clicked that. Oh, here. No, I don't want to end the meeting. I just want to leave the breakout room.
So Barb's muted, so I'm gonna get started as soon as she's going to,
Unmute and somehow or another make myself small again.
and bring the PowerPoint back up.
I'm trying.
So excited that we have 216 participants even after the breakout rooms. A lot of times we lose people, but I think once you've experienced how nice it is to have a conversation in that chat room, the breakout rooms, you can tell. Okay, and then we've got 2 new chats.
I just wanted to add while we're making this transition here that a
Mhm.
reminder that these are all practices. So you still need to take a step back and take a look at your systems. If you're taking a look at how you're collecting data here, you're going to want to make sure that you go back and develop a system for how you're going to collect behavioral data. And that also includes like taking a look at your behavioral definitions. They're going to look really different when we're talking about what's tardy look like or not showing up at all to the virtual classroom, and what do disruptions look like so that we can define them better in order to understand what it is that we need to teach. But right now we're just talking about this toolkit that is relying on these instructional practices, which is where we're going now.
Right. And if you also put any great thoughts or suggestions or strategies you heard, please do that in the chat box. Because what we actually do is take the transcripts from the chat box and we look at the strategies for that particular webinar. So we can share that with each other. So please feel free
I
to
just
do
want to ask
that.
a quick question. Are you and everybody seeing my screen?
No, I'm just seeing you.
Oh, you're not seeing the PowerPoint anymore. Okay.
No.
All right, I have to end the show. Sometimes when I go in and out of the chat boxes, the breakout rooms, you come back and I'm not sharing my screen anymore. So let me fix that.
And somebody asked a question about, do you have a sample behavior matrix for virtual learning? So please go to an April webinar that we have done on looking at the foundations of the foundations of a PBIS classroom, and you'll see examples. You'll also see a link to a document from the National Center on PBIS for virtual learning, and they'll talk about those behavior matrix that you can use in your remote setting.
And I tried a couple times on the chat box to answer people's questions about where they can find some specific answers. It's in their handout, what pages to look on for like specific examples of what choice making is all about and how do you give specific the steps to error correction. So you'll find that in the handout.
And so as we move the last piece of the webinar, it's that things that I know we're already doing, but keep these 4 keys to success in mind as we move through our virtual and remote classrooms. This is what we do know, that we need to take advantage of calm times. And in our physical classroom and in this virtual classroom, those are the times that we do our instruction and we teach and maybe we reteach the behaviors to help our students navigate successfully no matter where they are. And there are 4 things to consider during these calm times. We want to create that physical, emotional, and psychological safe environment, and we can do that by being predictable. So Barb, we want to click on so they can, perfect, thanks. So we want to, at this time, be able to establish our routines, maintain our structures, know how we transition from one breakout room or a chat to the other, but what's the predictability of that environment? And again, we talk about regulation, how important that is, that we can't teach it when behaviors have escalated, that it's these calm times that we can help support our kids manage their emotions and behaviors. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to give you a great strategy that a teacher has actually created. But the last one too is about resiliency. And for me to understand resiliency, it's what opportunities do we provide our kids to kind of recharge? If they have to pull from that reserve, how do we make sure that we can bounce back? So what kind of self-regulation strategies do we put in our toolkit? So this is, you can see the link on here. It was from Utopia, and it was about a process for building student resiliency. And there are 4 documents. In the handout, we have the documents enlarged, but there are 4 steps. The first one is to teach students to identify their stressors. So how do you feel? I feel stressed when, I feel upset when, I feel sad when. So then you want to be able to help the student identify what they normally do when those stressors are presented. And then there are some sentence starters that you can see when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling upset and mad and feeling sad. And then the third thing is to brainstorm alternative ways to respond to those stressors. This is where our kids need help. Ooh, look at that, Barb.
I don't know what that is.
That's okay, it's fine.
Squiggle. To be transparent
Yeah.
here, we have a squiggle.
And to be able to self-reflect, super important when we're talking about our skills that we're developing, right? We're developing this resiliency skill, like identifying ourselves, looking how we react, but then like at a Likert scale of just from a scale of 1 to 5. So, you know, how did I do when I used this strategy? Did it make me feel worse or did it make me feel better? And then the last is really evaluating. So what's the practical application of this new skill? How did it work for me? So just a great way to frame our thoughts about how we can teach resiliency skills with our kids.
We also want to make sure that we're establishing those positive relationships. And we've been talking about that on multiple different webinars over the last couple of months. So we just want to remember that we help by helping all of our kids feel that they're respected and validated and that they're being heard. We do that by using our 3 to 5 behavioral expectations where we're teaching and we're modeling, we're reinforcing, and we're being those, using those to do the corrected behaviors. And then we want to make sure we're setting up our environment for success. So we have to think about our virtual environment. How are we structuring that space? How are we doing a behavioral matrix that is for our virtual classroom, establishing those routines that we need to have now, very different routines than we have in our classrooms, in-person classrooms. How do we model and teach those expectations? How do we positively always interact with our students? And I think we have to go back to some of those really important relationship building strategies that we know about. We want to be the healthy adult that's in their life at school. That's what they're missing. A lot of them from home to school, they're used to us being there, always being there for them. We want to make sure we're learning about what are they interested in, and we want to respond in a timely way to their requests so that they don't feel left out and that we're not responding to everybody equally. Validate their concerns, even though they may not be our concerns. How do we validate their concerns and then take them to the next step of problem solving? We want to acknowledge those positive efforts that they're making. That's part of the work behind improving the attendance, is acknowledging their steps towards being better at attending, and suspend our own judgment about what's going on. Those are the things. And I think another important one here in relationships is just to be transparent with them when there's things that are happening that we can't change or we can't avoid in our environment. Be transparent with them, help them be problem solvers with us. I have no idea where that little squiggle line came from. It just developed on its own. But we want to be reminded, this is a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, that really they don't care how much you know until they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's important that we continue, and that's one of the things that kids are telling us they're really missing, is the care and love that they receive from their teachers.
So another key to success is to think about where and when triggers might occur for kids. What might set them off to get them off task or not engaged? So we want to try to develop an environment that avoids those conditions, of course, but we can't always do that. That's not realistic. But we can step back and say, gosh, you know, when did that happen for that student? Oh, when they had to go to that chat room or that breakout room, they they disconnected. So be thinking about that to be able to support our kids. We can go into the ABCs of behavior. I know there's a lot of BCBA people out there right now, but we're not going to talk about that so much as right now what can we do? And that's to kind of observe what's going on in your remote learning. We pull one of those prevention practices back in, active supervision. We can actively supervise even remotely. And by doing that, we could be kind of examining and looking and observing at what some of those triggers might be for our kids. So in the chat box, we invite you again to think of some triggers that you have observed going on with some of your students during remote learning. Anything that might trigger their misbehavior. Because once we do that, we can then anticipate what they'll do, and then we can restructure that setting or that routine to help them re-engage.
The other thing that we want to do is to make sure that we're consistent. We know that inconsistencies are confusing and they raise potential errors for kids. Kids will make mistakes with their behavior that they may not have made if we stay consistent with what it is that we're doing. And this is again a time to talk about being transparent, that we want to teaching our error corrections and being transparent on what's happening and the why and what's causing it, so that everybody can learn for that when we use our error correction. And this is really where you can use the choice a lot when you're working with students. So how can we be consistent with the fact that we're always going to give you choice? We're not going to one day go, no, you have to do it this way and that's it. We have to be consistent with our choices and what they look like. So I mentioned this earlier, that on the last page of your handout, these are the 7 categories of choice making. And with those 7 categories, you'll notice that in our error correction, it's after prompting, redirecting, reteaching, and providing choice. And it's a good time for us to bring up, you don't necessarily have to go in this order. You may decide that in your earlier instruction, you'd already done enough prompting and redirecting. You're actually going to be able to help the student quicker if you go right to remind them of our choices. What were our choices? Which one of those do you want to use right here? And that will help with de-escalating some of the students' behavior, even virtually.
It's critical that we remain in control of our own emotions. When we escalate our behavior, it's a giant predictor that the student's behavior will escalate as well. So again, just take a deep breath, right? And don't take things personal. And my mantra is, if Barb can move to the next slide. My mantra is that my brain should resemble a thermostat rather than a thermometer when it comes to disciplining a student. And so I think the visual kind of says it all. And we don't want our students to be in this reptilian brain, which is the red temperature. We want our kids to be calm and relaxed so that they can, or both of us working together, can problem solve and make decisions about how to get everybody back on track and engaged in our learning. There's an article that we have that's in the link to that article on co-regulation in discipline. And it's about the student-teacher relationship where both feel safe and connected even when the students make that poor choice. And we want us, adults, to have this regulated, calm brain state, because it takes a calm brain to calm another brain.
That's why I love the dragons. I just have to mention that. I think they're very cute, reminding us about what we need to do as we go up the thermometer with our own temperatures.
There's also a great resource. It's actually a toolkit for us as educators on compassion resilience. And that is something defined in the education field as the ability to maintain our physical, emotional, and mental well-being, which is using our energy productively while compassionately identifying and addressing the stressors that are barriers to learning for students. So this is a great resource. It's free, and you can actually use it for yourself. You can use it for, there's a family kit as well. You could extend that to you and your own personal family or to the families of your students. But take a look at it. There's also for administrators. So don't think that if you're not a teacher, you can't be a part of the Compassion Resilience Toolkit. But I like the idea that we really feel and are aware of others' distress, and we really want to alleviate that. But sometimes we're out of, somebody had said that too, we don't have the control to be able to do that. So what will we do so that we can really know what the reality is? We can't fix everybody's problem and their pain, but this is a great toolkit for us, both heart, spirit, strength, and mind. So we encourage you to take a look at this great tool.
And as we continue, and here again that we're going to be at least another 3 months in the stay-at-home phase, we need to really work on this compassion resilience, or at least I'm going to say I do. I'm to the point where, oh yeah, this is going to be a while and I better figure out how to handle it. All right, so we're bringing it to a close today. We just have a couple more minutes. Want to remind you about completing the evaluation for the webinars. May 15th, we're going to be taking a look at these, the committee that comes together across the state, and planning the webinars for June based on things that you're telling us you want. One of the final questions is what is something else that you need to know about? Because of these evaluations, we have several of the webinars that we're repeating this month that people have asked to see again or to be participants in. So please be sure to fill out this eval. And I think Christy has posted or is posting.
Is posting.
URL. Yeah, is posting the URL so you can catch it again, or you can always catch it when you download the PowerPoints as well. And it's also on the very first page of your handout. That's where the list of all the URLs from today are, all of the connections. I want to remind you that we are still having the conference. We're not sure if it's going to be a virtual conference or if it's going to be an in-person conference. It really depends on what the governor says. So it depends on where we are in California, and we'll be making that decision within probably the next 2 to 3 weeks. Hopefully you would be able to attend. The conference is September 21st through the 22nd. Otherwise, again, whatever we do, we'll be making sure we post online.
So what I've put in the chat box are the links to the California PBIS conference, to the webinar evaluation, and then the third link is the link to the CPC Community Cares, what we're going to be doing instead of the recognition system this year. So you have, that link is there for you to see, but it's also in the chat box as well. And we invite all schools doing wonderful, marvelous things to share their story. And I think if you click on there, you can tell your story by June 30th.
And it would be wonderful to hear from every school, everybody that we want, that wants to, about what you're doing in response to this virtual. There's amazing things happening in California, and we'd like to be able to share them with everybody. So this is your place to be able to do that. Again, just to remind you, there's more events coming up this month, and this is just a list. If you go to the URL on the very first page, or the one that's here on this page, or just go to PBIS-CalTAC.org and go to upcoming events, you'll be able to see all the events that are there. Some repeating and some that are new. This is just a thank you from the coalition for all coming together. And again, thanks to Stephanie for getting us all on board and making sure this happens. And again, the PBIS-CA.org website is there. Christy and I also want to thank you. Our contact information is there in case you want a copy of the PowerPoint. And also, if you want to go to the California Technical Assistance Center on PBIS, we have several pages of one of them that's just about responding to the COVID response. As we hear things from across the nation, we post them there so that you have access to that, and it's another resource for you. Christy, do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye, everybody. It was so nice to connect, having that human connection for an hour of my day today, and especially in the breakout rooms. Appreciated that as well. And I just feel so close to you because I've been monitoring your chats. So hope to chat again.
This is a chance for us all to wave to each other, say hi, say goodbye as you hang up.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
for your
Thanks.
support.
Oh, yes.
Everybody, sending love and light.
We have to figure out how to give big hugs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the resources. Oh, hi. We have a young student joining us, Mr. Lopez.
Everybody, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Oh, good. We needed that voice. Hi, Marie. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
I am going to download the save chat.
Okay, and I'm going to